Thanks for tuning in for the final Climate Friday newsletter of the month of March. Now that spring is well underway and we're rounding the corner and looking forward to the month of April, that means severe weather is also right around the corner, and we are nearing that time of year when we start to get severe thunderstorms and even the threat for tornadoes across the Midwest and the region. So with severe weather around the corner, in today's Climate Friday newsletter, we are going to break down the impacts when severe weather peaks and also what you can anticipate this year as the next few months unfold. Thanks for tuning in on our YouTube channel, online, or on WTOL 11+. Let's dive into the science and break down severe weather season and what you can expect as we kick off the month of April. Let's get into those graphics and when we peak with the severe weather, because it is right around the corner. Now, typically in Northwest Ohio, when you think about severe season, that peaks in the month of May. Now, of course, that is variable and it's something that changes from year to year, but oftentimes in the Midwest, May is the peak tornado season when we see the most of those severe thunderstorms that can produce tornadoes. Now, the further north you go, generally the later severe weather season peaks. That means if you live in central Michigan, even more towards the northern half of the state, you'll have to wait a little bit longer, and during the month of June, they see a summertime peak of severe weather. Summer severe weather is also commonplace in some of the southern provinces of Canada, such as Alberta. And you might not think of Canada as a severe weather hotspot, but during the summertime, it can be. Even the upper parts of the Midwest, like North and South Dakota, they get a later severe weather season due to the climate that occurs that far in the northern latitudes. So when does severe weather season peak across the country? It is nearing here in the Midwest, and something that we will prepare you for, and the WTOL 11 weather team will keep you safe. Further south, that green color shows you an earlier severe weather season that already begins in the month of March. Looking towards the Ohio River Valley, typically the month of April is when things start to heat on up. And if you look at most of the Buckeye State and the northern parts of the contiguous lower 48 United States, the severe weather season ramps up a little bit later. Now, in the southeastern U.S., they see an earlier peak of severe weather. That's caused by a number of factors. First and foremost, they are further south and closer to the equator and get warmer weather and also access to that rich humidity from the Gulf of Mexico. So with the warmth and the mugginess, they see the severe weather a little bit earlier. Even severe weather in January or February isn't that far out of the ordinary. Parts of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia see that severe weather reach its peak in the month of March, and you can refer to the color scheme at the top for reference. Now, if we look a little bit further to the north, near the Ohio River Valley, they start to see it in April a little bit further south of us, including Kentucky and parts of southern Indiana and southern Illinois. Now, here at home, when does severe weather season peak? Oftentimes in the month of May is when most of the Buckeye State sees that peak of severe weather. If you look further to the north, severe weather peaks a little bit later. Now, what is the prime hotspots for severe weather across the United States? You're probably familiar with the term Tornado Alley, something you may have heard in pop culture and even seen from your own experience if you have family or friends out there. Tornado Alley is generally referring to that part from the Texas and Oklahoma panhandle all the way up to South Dakota, and that region that I've shaded in red, that is where much of the tornadic activity across the United States occurs. Now, due to that Gulf moisture that comes in from the south, humid and warm conditions provide the fuel for thunderstorm activity. If you look at the Texas panhandle through the Oklahoma panhandle and parts of the Great Plains, that is the Tornado Alley that you may be familiar with. Even if it's just from a movie like Wizard of Oz, there is some scientific validity to that part of the Central Plains being Tornado Alley. In addition to the warm, humid air by the Gulf of Mexico, this part of the country also has access to cold and dry air coming in from the north and northwest. Now, when those two air masses butt heads, when you see the warmth from the south and the cool, dry air from the north, that provides a prime environment for severe weather and tornadic activity. So a lot of this central and southern plains region, that is where the majority of tornadoes occur, at least later on in the season. Now, here in the Midwest, we are not immune to tornadoes whatsoever, and there is a hot spot in the Midwest that I want to point out. Now, this is more of the traditional Tornado Alley, at least where a lot of the tornadic activity typically occurs, but across the Midwest, Midwest, there is a good amount of severe weather, and it happens to be just a little bit further to the west of us. Ohio and Michigan, yes, we get tornadoes. Yes, we get severe weather. And the WTOL 11 weather team always one step ahead with that forecast. However, if I had to pinpoint a hot spot across the Midwest, I would say that from my experience and from the research, it actually occurs a little to the west of us. So Illinois sees more tornadoes than we do. Even into western Indiana, like Valparaiso, they get a lot of tornadic activity, and portions of Missouri, including St. Louis, they get a good amount of severe weather as well. So the Midwest tornado hotspot, just a little bit west and a little bit south of where you're watching from. So bottom line, what can you expect? Severe weather season begins to ramp up in April in Ohio and Michigan. It reaches its peak typically in the month of May, but there are some years where we get the peak in June or even later. It depends on the weather pattern that's occurring and the year-to-year variation that changes from year. Here's a look at the second severe weather season. Now, this is something that we often talk about that can occur later on in the autumn time. Now, as you know, even in the late fall and early winter, we can get some bizarre weather patterns that can bring us severe thunderstorms and even an isolated tornado, let's say in October, November, and yes, even into December. Even though many of you are in snow mode by then, it's not totally out of the question to get a secondary severe weather season. So in the Climate Friday newsletter, we always have to discuss, is climate change playing a role, and what role might that be? Yes, it is, and one of the prime ingredients for thunderstorms is actually increasing. That ingredient is thunderstorm energy, and due to the warming weather that we've seen due to climate change, there has been an increase in storm energy. Everywhere in this map that's shaded in purple, that goes from Michigan down to Florida, up to Maine. That is a lot of the eastern United States. There's been an increase in storm energy within the last few decades that scientists have noticed. Now, the effects of climate change are not ubiquitous across the entire United States. If you look to the west of the Mississippi, there's actually been a decrease in storm energy. Now, that's interesting because that's where I drew the original tornado alley. One thing that scientists have noticed is that due to this uptick in storm energy in the east, Tornado Alley has actually begun to shift. Due to climate change, what we're seeing is a further eastward migration of Tornado Alley. So a lot of those states like Illinois are actually seeing more tornadoes than they used to, and some states like Kansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma seeing a little bit less. Of course, there is the year-to-year variation factor, but one of these trends, due to the decrease in storm energy across the plains and an increase in storm energy across the Ohio River Valley and the East Coast, is an eastward shift in Tornado Alley. Time will tell if that trend continues as we head towards the 2020s. Now, storm energy has overall increased due to the warmer temperatures because of climate change. There is a lot more moisture available because when you get those warmer temperatures, you get more evaporation and there's more water in the atmosphere that can produce heavy rain, severe thunderstorms, and even tornadoes. Here in Toledo, we've seen a noticeable spring warming. In the last decade alone, there's been a 2-degree increase in springtime temperatures. Now, that might not sound like much, but if you think about it, that only happened in a 10-year time frame. Imagine multiplying that over several decades, and you understand why this is such a big impact. Now, with every degree of warming, there's more moisture in the atmosphere. 1 degree equates to 4% more moisture. Again, doesn't sound like a whole lot, does it? However, in the last decade alone, we've gone up 2 degrees. 2 times 4 is 8%. There's 8% more moisture or juice and fuel in the atmosphere than there used to be. And of course, when you compound that over decade on decade on decade of warming, that causes more of that ingredient that fuels thunderstorm development. In addition, we have seen an uptick in not only tornadoes, not only severe weather, but all of these severe weather events. And there's been a significant increase in the number of natural disasters, in particular, costly financial natural disasters. Looking at the number of billion-dollar disasters, which of course, that would be the most extreme scenario. That would be the type of thing where it's a tornado that happens to go through a big metro area, but most of these are heavy rain events that damage farm fields and farmland, or even tropical cyclones and hurricanes. Looking at the data, we've seen the last few years are well above average. That bottom line is the average number of annual billion-dollar disasters, and the last few years have all been well above normal. Of course, part of that is due to climate change, part of it's only correlational, but there has been definitely a trend that scientists have noticed towards more costly disasters. Bottom line, we are seeing an earlier start to severe season, and we're seeing more storm energy. What that means for you is that even though traditionally we saw a peak of severe weather season in May, we are starting to see it earlier and earlier and earlier. Be on high alert during the month of April, as we will likely see some thunderstorms and even some severe weather. And with this increase in storm energy, we are seeing storms that are more potent and, generally speaking, a little bit stronger. Now, we're going to have to brush off the rust as far as severe weather preparedness goes, because it's been a little while since we saw widespread severe weather, let alone tornadic activity in southern Michigan and northwest Ohio. The last time we had a tornado warning issued by the National Weather Service Cleveland, that was a while ago, looking back to last summer, July 20th. That one happened in Crawford County, Ohio. And again, it's been a little while. The last time we had a tornado touchdown, that was even further back. Looking almost a year back, on May 3rd, there was a tornado touchdown. That one happened in Huron County, and it was confirmed as an EF1 near the town of Monroeville, Ohio. So that was our last touchdown almost a full year ago. That being said, this year has all the makings of a bit of an active start to the severe weather season, and that can mean that we flip the script. After a couple quiet years, we could see more severe weather happen this year. Again, May is traditionally when we see the peak of severe season, but due to climate change, we are seeing an earlier start, we are seeing more severe weather, and we're also seeing that gradual eastern migration of Tornado Alley, and that means the Midwest is likely to see an uptick in the amount of severe weather, while states out west see a little bit less than they used to. As we head into the spring season, the WTOL 11 weather team will keep you updated. And for our first April Climate Friday newsletter, tune in next Friday. Subscribe at WTOL.com/email.